Tonight we are going to spend some time with one of the most famous books in Buddhism, the Dhammapada. It is a collection of sayings from the Buddha's teachings, preserved for more than 2,000 years. It has 26 small chapters, each one a quiet doorway into the heart of Buddhist wisdom. Tonight we are going to step through just one of those doorways, the chapter called the mind. Before we begin, feel free to share what time it is and where you're listening from. The teaching we'll hear tonight contains only 11 verses. But within those few lines, the Buddha explores something we all live with. The mind that will not stay still. The mind that, on a quiet night, becomes louder than the room around us. You do not need to know anything about Buddhism or meditation. The Buddha simply invited his students to listen, to look closely, and to see what was true in their own experience. That is the same invitation tonight. Take a slow, deep breath. Wherever you are, let yourself settle in. Thank you for joining us here at Midnight Monk. Let us begin. People often think their wandering mind at night is a personal flaw. You lie down to sleep, and the mind starts up. It goes to tomorrow. It returns to yesterday. It rehearses conversations. It frets, and the person lying there often blames themselves for it. Why can I not just rest? What is wrong with me? But this experience is not new, and it is not yours alone. It is one of the most universal experiences of being human, and one of the oldest things in the world to be written about. The Buddha noticed this same restlessness himself over 2,000 years ago. He sat with it. He watched his own mind do exactly what your mind does. And then he taught about it plainly to anyone who would listen. He did not call the wandering mind a problem. He did not call it a failure. He simply named it with great kindness and pointed to a way through. That teaching is preserved in a single small chapter of the Dhammapada, just 11 verses. And tonight, we are going to spend some quiet hours with those verses, beginning with one of the most relatable in all of Buddhist wisdom. There is a verse in the mind chapter that says this: hard to hold back, flighty, alighting where it will. It is good to tame the mind. A tamed mind leads to bliss. The Buddha is describing the mind exactly as it is. Not the mind we wish we had. Not the mind some imagined wise person has, somewhere far away. The mind we actually live with. Yours and mine. Flighty. Alighting where it will. He does not call the mind bad, or broken, or in need of fixing. There is no shame in this verse, no judgment, no demand that the mind should be different than it is. There is only description, the mind as it actually is. Flighty, hard to hold back, alighting where it will. For many people, hearing the mind described this way is the first time they have ever felt their own experience met without judgment. Most of us were taught, somewhere along the way, to be ashamed of a wandering mind. We come to believe that calm people have calm minds, that meditation is about emptying the mind, that falling asleep should be easy. And if it isn't, we tell ourselves, something must be wrong with us. The Buddha says none of that. He tells us the mind is naturally restless, naturally hard to hold, naturally alighting wherever it pleases. Not as a punishment, not as a sign that we are doing something wrong, but simply as the way the mind is. There is a teaching in Buddhism that the mind is like a small bird. Birds fly. That is what birds do. Telling a bird to stop flying is not wisdom. It is misunderstanding what kind of creature you are dealing with. The mind that comes to you at night, that goes to tomorrow's meeting, that replays the conversation, that wanders into worry, is not a broken mind. It is a mind doing what minds do. This is the first thing the verse offers. Relief. The simple, kind recognition that you are not broken. You are human. And then the verse goes on. It is good to tame the mind. A tamed mind leads to bliss. This second part is where some people get confused, because the word tame can sound harsh. It can sound like control, like force, like the mind is a wild animal that has to be subdued. But this is not what the Buddha meant. In the language of the Dhammapada, taming the mind is closer to befriending it, working with it patiently, learning its habits, becoming familiar with it the way you become familiar with anyone you have lived with for a long time. A tamed mind is not a silenced mind, nor a perfect one. It is a mind that has been met, that knows itself, that is no longer at war with its own nature. And the verse ends with a promise. A tamed mind leads to bliss. The word bliss might also sound large, but in Buddhist understanding, this kind of bliss is not ecstasy. It is not some special spiritual state. It is the simple, quiet ease that comes when you have stopped fighting yourself. For many people, this kind of bliss is harder to recognize than the bigger emotions. It is quiet. It is undramatic. It does not arrive with fanfare. It is more like the absence of a low, constant struggle we did not even know was there until it began to soften. That softening is the bliss the verse is pointing to. When the mind is tamed in this gentle sense, ease becomes possible. Not because the mind has stopped thinking, but because thinking no longer feels like an enemy. The mind can move and the body can rest, and the two are not in conflict. That is the bliss the verse is pointing to. Not silence. Ease. This is what the mind chapter is offering us tonight. Not a method to silence the mind. Not a technique to push it into stillness. Something gentler than that. A way of being with the mind that does not require it to be different than it is. Let us explore a story about this. There was once a young weaver in a small village by the sea. She was skilled at her craft. Her hands knew the threads. Her shuttle moved across the loom from dawn until dusk. And in the daytime, she was at peace. The work itself was a kind of meditation, the rhythm steady, her mind absorbed in the colors. But at night, when she lay down on her mat, something changed. The moment her body stopped moving, her mind started. Thoughts about the next day's orders, worries about a difficult customer, conversations from the market, replayed 3 or 4 times, with all the things she should have said but did not. Memories of small mistakes she had made years ago. Questions about her future. The mind, freed from the demands of the loom, ran wild. She tried everything she could think of. She drank warm tea. She walked before bed. She tried to force the thoughts to stop, telling them firmly to be quiet. She tried to count her breaths. Some nights this helped a little. Most nights it did not. After many months of poor sleep, she went to see her old aunt, who lived at the edge of the village. Her aunt was known for being a wise woman, not in a showy way, She did not give lectures or claim to know secrets. She just had a quietness about her, the kind of quietness people came to when they were tired. The young weaver sat down across from her aunt and told her everything. The racing thoughts, the sleeplessness, the frustration that she could not seem to stop her own mind. Her aunt listened, nodding occasionally. When the young woman was finished, the aunt said, "Tell me, when a guest knocks at your door, what do you do?" The young weaver blinked. She did not understand the question. "I open it," she said. "I let them in. I offer them tea. And when the guest stays too long, what do you do then?" "I am polite. I sit with them. I do not force them to leave. Eventually, they go on their own." "And do you stand at the door all night, watching to see if more guests will come?" The young weaver laughed. "No, of course not. I sleep." The old aunt smiled. "Your thoughts are guests too," she said. "They come to your door. Some are pleasant. Some are not. Some stay too long. But none of them stay forever. They will move on, as guests do. You do not have to fight them at the door. And you certainly do not have to stand watch over them. Greet them as you would greet anyone passing through. Then let them go." The young weaver thought about this for a long time. She did not fully understand, but something in the words felt true. She thanked her aunt, gathered her shawl, and walked home through the quiet evening streets. That night, when she lay down, the thoughts began as they always did. But this time, instead of trying to silence them, she simply noticed each one. Hello, thought about tomorrow. Hello, memory from last week. Hello, old worry returning. She did not argue with them. She did not invite them to stay. She let them be and let them pass. For the first time in many months, she did not feel at war with her own mind. There was a softness in her chest she had not known before, a kind of ease. The thoughts kept coming. The thoughts kept going. And she lay there, breathing in the dark, no longer fighting anything at all. The thoughts did not change for the young weaver. The mind did not stop. She did not learn some special technique to make her mind quiet. What changed was her relationship with what was happening inside her. This is one of the deepest teachings in Buddhism. That suffering in many cases does not come from the thing itself. It comes from our struggle against the thing. The thoughts at night are not the trouble. The fighting with the thoughts is the trouble. This was a central insight of the Buddha's teaching. That much of our suffering comes not from what happens to us, but from how we receive what happens. The thoughts arrive. They will always arrive. The suffering is in the way we meet them. And the verse is showing us how to meet them differently. The verse from the Dhammapada calls the mind flighty, alighting where it will. The young weaver had been trying, for many months, to stop the alighting. Her aunt taught her to let the alighting happen, to meet each landing with a quiet nod, and the mind, met that way, began to find its own rest. Let us explore another story. In a small mountain town, two old friends met after many years apart. They had grown up together as boys. Then life had carried them in different directions. Now they were both old men, and they had not seen each other in nearly 40 years. They sat on a low stone wall outside a small tea house, watching the road, drinking from rough clay cups. For a long time, they simply enjoyed each other's company. Then, slowly, they began to talk. The first friend had spent his life trying to find inner peace. He had been a serious man even as a boy, and as he grew older, his seriousness deepened. He had traveled to several monasteries. He had studied with strict teachers. He had spent years sitting in long retreats, trying to discipline his mind into stillness. He had read many books. He could quote teachings from memory. The second friend had taken a different path. He had lived an ordinary life. He had married, raised children, kept a small shop selling pots and pans. He had no formal training in meditation. He had never been to a monastery. But somewhere along the way, by accident or by grace, he had become a man of unusual peace. They began to compare notes. "Tell me," said the first friend, "I have spent decades trying to quiet my mind. And still, every night, the thoughts come. Every meditation, the thoughts come. I have done everything the teachings say. What am I missing?" The second friend laughed gently. "Do your thoughts come?" he asked. "Yes. Constantly." "Do mine?" "Yes, of course. Constantly." The first friend looked surprised. "But you seem so peaceful. Surely you have learned to stop them." "Oh no," said the second friend. "I never learned that. I do not think anyone can. The thoughts will come. That is what minds do. Then how are you so at ease?" The second friend thought for a moment. "I think," he said slowly, "the difference is this. You have spent your life trying to make your mind your enemy and then defeat it. I gave up that fight a long time ago. Now I just sit with my mind, the way I would sit with a friend who talks too much. I do not always listen to what it says, but I do not resent it either. It is just my mind, doing what my mind does." The first friend was quiet for a long time. "You mean," he said finally, "I have spent 40 years fighting the wrong battle." "You have not fought the wrong battle," said his friend kindly. "You have fought a battle that did not need to be fought at all." They sat in silence for a while. A small wind moved through the trees. Somewhere in the distance, a bell rang once and was still. The first friend walked home that evening lighter than he had been in years. Not because anything had changed in his life, not because his mind had grown quiet, but because, for the first time, he was no longer at war with himself. In this story, two men with completely different lives arrive at the same teaching. One after decades of struggle, one almost without realizing it. Both come to understand, eventually, what the Buddha taught in this single verse. A tamed mind leads to bliss. Not a silenced mind. Not a controlled mind. A mind that has been allowed to be what it is and met with patience instead of force. There is a phrase often used in the Buddhist tradition. The mind is the master. But the master, here, is not someone who rules with force. The master is the one who knows the mind so well that the mind no longer needs to be controlled. Friendship, not domination. Familiarity, not force. The Buddha taught this through what he called mindfulness, the simple, ongoing practice of being present to what is happening inside us, not changing it, not fixing it, just being present. And in that presence, the mind comes to rest of its own accord. This is one of the oldest images in Buddhism. The mind is like water in a jar. It has its own natural clarity. We do not need to add anything to it. We do not need to filter it. We just need to stop stirring. And when we stop stirring, what was always there reveals itself. So here is something simple to carry with you tonight. It is not a technique, really. It is more like a way of being with yourself. The next thought that comes to mind, instead of pushing it away, simply notice it. You do not have to name it, label it, or analyze it. Just see that it has arrived, and then, gently, see that it has gone. And then the next one will come, and the next. They will keep coming. That is what minds do. But you do not have to do anything about them. You do not have to chase them or silence them. You just have to be present to them, the way the old aunt told the young weaver, like guests passing through a doorway. Some welcome, some not, all of them passing. And as the mind softens, the body often softens with it. The shoulders, maybe. The chest. The breath. When the mind stops fighting itself, the body knows before we do. There is no effort to this. It is what happens naturally when the war inside ends. This is the first kind step toward what the verse calls a tamed mind. Not stillness, just kindness, toward yourself, toward the mind you have. Let us pause for a moment. Take a breath. Notice how the body feels. And when you are ready, we will continue together. There is an image in the mind chapter that has stayed with people for over 2,000 years. Painters have painted it. Teachers have taught with it. Children have learned about it. And tonight, when we have set down our daily work and lie quietly in the dark, it can speak to us still. It is a simple image. A craftsman in a small workshop working slowly on a single arrow. The Buddha, in this chapter of the Dhammapada, compares the mind to that arrow. And he compares the wise person to the craftsman. What this image offers is one of the deepest teachings in Buddhism about how to work with a wandering mind. Not by force, not by demand, but through the slow, patient practice of return, of bringing the mind gently, again and again, into its own true shape. The verse goes like this. The mind quivers and shakes, hard to guard, hard to curb. The discerning straighten it out, like a fletcher straightens an arrow. A fletcher is someone who makes arrows. It is an ancient craft, perhaps the oldest precision craft there is. For thousands of years, before the invention of metalwork or pottery or weaving on looms, there were already fletchers, shaping arrows for the hunt. To make a good arrow, the wood must be perfectly straight. If it bends even slightly, it will fly off course. The hunter will miss. The arrow will be lost. So the fletcher works carefully, sometimes for hours on a single shaft, to bring it into true. But here is the thing about wood. It does not want to be straight. It has grown in the forest with its own natural bends. It remembers its old shapes. Even after the fletcher has straightened it once, it will sometimes return to its earlier curve overnight. So the fletcher does not work in one sitting. He shapes the arrow. He sets it down. He returns to it the next day. He warms it gently over the fire, just enough to soften the fibers. He sets the bend. He lets it cool. He puts it aside again. This is how a straight arrow is made. Not in one heroic effort. In many small returns. The Buddha looked at this craft, which he would have seen practiced in every village he passed through, and he saw in it a perfect picture of how the mind requires our care. The mind, like the arrow, has its own bends. Old habits of worry, old patterns of thought, long-established ways of returning to what is familiar, whether or not what is familiar is helpful. When we try to make the mind go straight in a single effort, when we declare, "I will not think about this tonight," or "I will silence my worries," we usually fail. The mind, like wood, has its own memory. But when we work with it the way a fletcher works with the arrow, something different happens. We notice the bend. We attend to it gently. We do not force it. We do not break it. We just bring it, with kindness, back toward the straight. And then we set it down. And then we return. The Buddha called this kind of practice mindfulness. The English word can sound thin, especially now when it appears on coffee mugs and yoga schedules. But the original meaning is closer to remembering. The practice of remembering, over and over, to come back, to the breath, to the moment, to the body, to the actual experience of this present life, which is the only life we have. In every school of Buddhism, from the quiet forest traditions of the South to the great Zen monasteries of the East, this is the foundation. Not stillness, not silence. The patient practice of return. Different teachers have called it by different names. But underneath the names, it is always the same gesture. The mind has wandered. The hand of attention gently brings it back. Every time the mind wanders, and we notice it has wandered, and we gently bring it back, we have done one return, one straightening of the arrow. We have not stopped the mind from wandering. We have not become spiritual masters. We have just made one small adjustment. Tomorrow we will make another, and the day after that, another. This is the path in the Buddha's teaching. Not a single moment of great insight. A long, slow, patient series of returns. And the bliss the verse promises, the bliss of the tamed mind, does not come at the end, when the mind is finally still. It comes inside each return. The kindness with which we bring ourselves back, again and again. That kindness is itself the bliss. Let us explore a story about this. In a small mountain village, long ago, there lived an old fletcher who was known across the region for the quality of his arrows. Hunters came from far away to buy them. They said his arrows flew truer than any others. The fletcher had taken on a young apprentice, an eager boy who wanted badly to learn the craft. The boy was quick and strong and proud of his skill. He had a good eye and steady hands. He could rough out a shaft from a fresh branch in under an hour. He was certain he would surpass his master before long. But there was one thing about the master's work that frustrated him deeply. The old fletcher was slow, maddeningly slow. He would work on a single arrow for many days. He would shape it, then set it aside on a shelf. Hours later, he would pick it up again, look at it carefully, make a small adjustment, then set it aside once more. Sometimes he would not touch it for a whole day, sometimes a week. The apprentice could finish 5 arrows in the time it took his master to finish one. But the master's arrows were always perfect. The boy's own arrows, however quickly he had made them, always had some small flaw. One afternoon, the apprentice could stand it no longer. "Why do you work so slowly?" he asked his master. "Why do you leave the arrow on the shelf for days? You could finish so many more if you simply applied yourself." The old fletcher looked up from his bench. He held the half-finished arrow in his hand. "Come and look at your arrows," he said. The apprentice brought him 3 of his recent ones. The old man took each in turn. He held it at eye level. He sighted along its length. Then he set them down. "This one bends slightly to the left," he said. "This one has a slight curve at the back. This one is almost straight, but not quite." "They will still fly," the apprentice protested. "They will hit the target. They will fly," his master said. "But not as truly as they could. What I am trying to teach you is not how to make an arrow that will fly. It is how to make an arrow that is true. There is a difference." He picked up his own slow arrow again. "You cannot hurry a thing into straightness," he said. "You can only return to it. Today, I will bring it back a little. Tomorrow, I will bring it back a little more. The wood remembers its old shape. So I must remember mine and bring the wood back, gently, again and again, until my way of seeing it is what the wood follows." The apprentice did not understand. Not fully. He went back to his bench and began another arrow. But that night, lying on his mat, he could not stop thinking about his master's words. You cannot hurry a thing into straightness. You can only return to it. He thought about his own life, his own habits, the way he had been working, the way he had been with himself. Many years later, when he was an old man and a famous craftsman in his own right, he understood. His master had not been teaching him about arrows at all. He had been teaching him how to be with a thing that resists, with wood that bent, with apprentices who did not understand, with his own quick hands that wanted to rush, with everything in a life that comes into shape slowly through the kindness of returning to it, again and again and again. The old Fletcher was speaking, of course, about more than the craft of arrows. He was speaking about the slow work of becoming anyone we wish to become, about friendships, about skills, about the mind. In Buddhist understanding, this is one of the great laws of inner life. You cannot hurry the heart. You cannot hurry the mind. You cannot push the soul into shape through force of will. These things do not respond to pressure. They respond to attention. They respond to return. A mind, like an arrow, will revisit its old bends. We will worry tonight about something we worried about a year ago. We will replay a conversation we have replayed 100 times. This is not a sign of failure. This is the wood remembering its shape. What changes the mind, in the end, is not effort. It is the patient hand that keeps returning. There is an old saying in Zen that the mind is trained not by force, but by familiarity. We do not become someone new by deciding to be. We become someone new by returning, again and again, to the small choices that shape us. Each return is a small kindness. Each return is a small turning. And over time, without our noticing, we have become someone other than we were. Let us explore another story. In an old monastery, perched on the side of a mountain, there lived a young monk who had only recently taken his vows. He was perhaps 20 years old. He had come to the monastery because he had heard, in his village, that the monks knew the secret to a quiet mind. He wanted, more than anything, to learn it. But the monastery had disappointed him. The teachers did not give him any techniques. They did not share special words or sacred chants. They simply taught him to sit and to follow his breath. That was all. For weeks, the young monk sat, and for weeks, his mind would not stay with the breath. He would breathe in, intend to follow the breath, and within 3 seconds his mind would be somewhere else, planning the next day's chores, replaying a conversation from his village, thinking about food, thinking about whether he had made the right decision in coming here at all. After many weeks of this, he could not bear it anymore. He went to his teacher, an old monk who had been sitting in that same place for 40 years. "I cannot do this," the young monk said. "I sit and I follow the breath and my mind goes somewhere else. I bring it back and it goes again. I bring it back and it goes again. I cannot keep my mind on one thing for more than a few seconds. I think I am not meant for this practice." The old monk listened. He did not interrupt. When the young man had finished, the old teacher was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Tell me, when your mind wanders, what do you do?" "I bring it back," said the young monk. "And when it wanders again?" "I bring it back again. And when it wanders a third time, I bring it back a third time." "And what do you call the wandering?" "Failure." The old teacher smiled. "And what do you call the bringing back?" The young monk hesitated. "Just what I am supposed to do, I suppose, before I fail again." The old monk shook his head slowly. He picked up a small stone from beside his cushion and held it in his open palm. "The wandering is not the failure," he said. "The wandering is what minds do. It is no more a failure than this stone being heavy is a failure. It is simply what is." He closed his hand around the stone. "The bringing back, that is the practice. Not the moment before the wandering, not the moment of getting it right. The bringing back, that is the entire thing. That is the only thing we are doing here." He opened his hand again. "Every time you bring your mind back, that is one moment of practice. Whether you bring it back 10 times in a single session or 10,000 times, that is the same practice, over and over. The teacher you were looking for in coming here is not me. It is your own returning. That is who teaches you. That is who has been teaching you all along." The young monk sat with this for a long time. He went back to his cushion the next morning. His mind wandered as it always did. He brought it back, and he kept sitting. The old monk gave his young student one of the deepest gifts in Buddhist teaching. He gave him a different way to see his own practice. For most of us, when we set out to do something better, we measure ourselves by the outcome. Did the mind stop wandering? Did I make the arrow straight in one try? Did I learn the lesson today? And when we fall short, we count it as failure. The Buddha, in this verse, offers a different measure. The fletcher does not measure himself by how many bends the arrow had. He measures himself by the patience with which he returns to it. Each return is the work itself. In Buddhist understanding, this is the heart of practice. Not perfection, not the absence of difficulty. The patient hand that keeps returning, the mind that wanders 10,000 times and is brought back 10,000 times is not a failed mind. It is a mind being shaped slowly by the kindness of its own returning. The Buddha once said that just as the great ocean has one taste, the taste of salt, his teaching has one taste, the taste of freedom. The freedom he was pointing to is not the freedom from a wandering mind. It is the freedom from believing that the wandering mind is the problem. Once we see that the bringing back is the practice, the wandering can no longer harm us. It is just the mind doing what minds do. And we, gently, are doing what humans do. We are returning. So here is something to carry with you tonight. The Fletcher and the old monk both already talked about it. Whatever the mind does in the next hours, when it wanders, simply bring it back. To the breath, to the body, to this room, to the dark beyond the window. Wherever you choose to rest your attention, the mind will leave again, probably within seconds. That is fine. That is what minds do. Bring it back. It will leave again. Bring it back. There is no failure here. There is no count being kept. There is no measuring of whether you have done the practice right. The bringing back is the practice. Every time, without exception. And as you do this, do not be hard with yourself. The Fletcher is never hard with the wood. He knows the wood will return to its old shape. He just returns, kindly, again. So can you. So can we all. This is what the verse offers, not the perfect arrow, the patient hand that knows how to come back. So we let the mind do what the mind does. And we, as much as we are able tonight, do what the wise have done for 2,000 years. We return when we notice we have wandered, and then we return again. Take a slow, deep breath. Notice the quiet. When you are ready, we will go on together. The mind chapter, in its 11 verses, mostly describes what the mind is like and how to work with it. But there is one verse near the middle of the chapter that does something different. It does not describe the mind. It describes the person who has tended the mind. It paints a small portrait of what is possible. The verse names 4 small things, 4 qualities available to any of us that quietly describe what happens when we have spent some time being kind to our own minds. The 4 sound ordinary at first, but each one points to something much deeper than it appears. They are, in fact, the thing most of us have been quietly looking for in everything we have ever pursued. The verse goes like this: whose heart is undamaged, who has given up right and wrong, alert, has nothing to fear. 4 qualities. Let us walk through them, one by one. The first is the undamaged heart. This is not the heart that has never been hurt. None of us have that heart, and the verse is not interested in pretending otherwise. The undamaged heart is the heart that has been allowed to heal, that has not carried every old wound forward, year after year, into the present moment. That is not still arguing in the dark with someone who hurt it long ago. Most of us walk around with hearts that are partially damaged, not because we are bad people, because we are alive. We have been hurt. We have hurt others. We have made mistakes. The question is not whether the damage happened. The question is whether we have let it heal. In the Buddhist understanding, healing is not the same as forgetting. The undamaged heart remembers everything. It just no longer uses those memories as weapons against itself or against anyone else. The hurts have passed through it and gone on. The second quality is the most surprising of the 4. The verse says, has given up right and wrong. This sounds at first, like something dangerous, as if the person were free of morality, as if they no longer cared. But this is not what the Buddha meant. The right and wrong in this verse is not ethics. It is the inner courtroom most of us live inside. The constant grading. Was I a good person today? Did I say the right thing? Am I doing this well? Did I make the right choice 5 years ago, 10 years ago, when I was 12? That inner court runs in the background all day for most of us. We barely notice it because we have lived with it our whole lives. It is the voice that grades each interaction. It is the voice that replays conversations at 3 in the morning and asks whether we said the wrong thing. To give up right and wrong, in the verse's sense, is to lay down this internal judge. Not to abandon ethics. To abandon the courtroom. The person in the verse still acts with kindness. They simply no longer audit every breath of their lives. The third quality is alert. This word can sound tense like vigilance, but that is not what the verse means. There are two kinds of alertness. The first is the alertness of fear. The animal in the field, scanning for danger. The mind that is on guard against threats. Most of us know this kind well. It is exhausting. The second is the alertness of presence. The grandmother who notices her grandchild's small change of mood. The fisherman who knows from the surface of the water what is happening beneath. This is not the alertness of fear. It is the alertness of love. The verse means this second kind. Alert because awake. Alert because present. Not because something dangerous might happen. And the last quality has nothing to fear. This is not the absence of fear because nothing can go wrong. Things can go wrong. The Buddha was speaking to people who lived in a world even more uncertain than our own. He was not promising them safety. What he was promising was something deeper. The foundation underneath us, the verse says, does not depend on what happens. The events of life will come. Some of them will be hard. But the bottom of us, the heart itself, is not what those events arrive at. The events arrive at the surface. A person with nothing to fear is not a person who has been promised that nothing will hurt them. It is a person who has discovered that nothing essential can be taken from them. What is that essential thing? The verse does not name it, but the mind chapter has been pointing toward it the whole time. The awareness that watches everything come and go without being undone by any of it. The heart that remembers everything and is no longer wounded by what it remembers. That is what remains. That is what no event can take. These four together describe a person who has come to terms with being human. The hurts have been allowed to heal. The inner court has been laid down. The eyes are open. The fear is gone, not because nothing can happen, but because what is most essential cannot be taken away. This is what the mind chapter is showing us is possible. Not a perfected life, not the absence of difficulty, a heart that has been gently put back together and now rests easy. Let us explore a story about this. In a small village by a river, there once lived an old grandmother whose home was at the edge of the wheat fields. She had outlived 2 husbands and most of her friends. She kept chickens and a small garden and a clay pot of medicinal herbs that she gave away to anyone in the village who asked. People came to see her not for the herbs. They came for her presence. There was something about her that no one could quite name, but everyone recognized. When you sat in her kitchen, your shoulders came down. Your breath slowed. The worries that had felt urgent that morning seemed smaller by the time you walked home. For years, no one quite understood why. She was not wise in any showy way. She did not give long speeches or quote sacred texts. She did not pretend to have answers she did not have. She was just there, in her quiet kitchen, with her hands busy and her eyes kind. One afternoon, a young woman from the village came to see her. The young woman was perhaps 25, recently married, and full of worry. She worried about her marriage. She worried about her work. She worried about her parents getting older. She worried about whether she was a good person. She worried about the worry itself. The grandmother poured them both tea. She listened. She did not interrupt. When the young woman had said everything, the grandmother set down her cup. "I have been watching you for years," she said, "since you were a small child." "I know," said the young woman. "You are afraid of so many things." "Yes." "May I ask you something?" said the grandmother. "Of course. You came to see me today because something in you knows that I am not afraid. Is that right?" The young woman thought about it. "Yes, I think so. It is not because I have had an easier life than you," the grandmother said. "I have lost more than you have lost. I have hurt more than you have hurt. I have made worse mistakes than you have made." She paused, looking out the window at the wheat moving in the wind. "Many years ago," she said, "I stopped grading myself. I stopped asking whether I was doing well, or whether I was a good person, or whether I had said the right thing. I just did the best I could, and then I let the day go. And after a while, I stopped grading other people too. I just let them be themselves. And do you know what I discovered?" "What?" "There was nothing left to be afraid of. The fear, all along, had been about the grading, about what the verdict would be. When I stopped passing judgment, the fear had nowhere to land. It just dissolved." The young woman sat in the kitchen for a long time. She did not say anything. The fire crackled. A chicken made a soft sound outside. When she finally rose to leave, the old grandmother walked her to the door. They embraced once, quickly. Then the young woman walked home through the wheat fields, slower than she had come. She did not have answers, but something in her had begun, very quietly, to let go. The grandmother gave the young woman the second quality of the verse, the laying down of the inner judge, and the moment she described, the moment when the fear had nowhere to land, is one of the great hidden movements of any human life. Most of us never see this. We do not notice that our fears are not, finally, about the things we think they are about. They are about the verdict. They are about whether we will pass the inner test, the test of being a good person, the test of being right, the test of being adequate to the day. When the test is finally set down, the fear has nothing to attach to. There is no failure to dread. There is no judgment coming. There is only this moment and the small kind work of meeting it. Let us explore another story. In an old monastery, high in the mountains, there lived a monk who had been practicing for almost 60 years. He had entered the monastery as a young man. He had grown old within its walls. Most of his original teachers were long gone. His friends from the early days had moved on, or passed away, or grown into elders themselves. He was not famous. He had written no books. He had not founded a school of his own. He had simply stayed, year after year, doing the small, ordinary work of monastic life, tending the gardens, sweeping the courtyard, sitting in meditation each morning and evening, greeting visitors who came up the long mountain path. One day, a young traveler made the climb. He had heard in his village that there was a very old monk at the top of the mountain who was said to have found peace. The young traveler had been searching for something he could not quite name. He had read books. He had visited teachers. He had tried many things. None of it had brought him what he was looking for. He was led to a small room where the old monk sat on a worn cushion. The monk looked up. He gestured to a second cushion. The young traveler sat down. For a while, neither of them spoke. The old monk seemed perfectly at ease in the silence. Finally, the young traveler said, "I have heard you have practiced for 60 years. Yes. May I ask what you have gained?" The old monk thought for a long moment. He looked at the small window, at the patch of sky beyond it. He looked at his old hands. Then he looked at the young man. "I am at home in myself," he said. The young traveler waited. He had expected more. A list, perhaps. Specific powers. Specific insights. Some doctrine that would change his life. "That is all?" he said. "That is all," said the old monk. The young traveler felt something close to disappointment. He had climbed a mountain for this. The old monk seemed to notice the disappointment and did not mind it. He poured tea. He passed a small cup across the floor. "You expected more," he said gently. "It is all right. I expected more too, when I was your age. I came here looking for many things. I am still here only because I eventually realized that the one thing I most needed was the one thing I had not been looking for." "And what was that?" said the young traveler. The old monk smiled. "To stop being a stranger to myself." The young man held his cup in both hands. The tea was hot. The room was very quiet. Somewhere, far away, a bell rang. It was many years before he understood what the old monk had said. But on the long walk down the mountain that afternoon, he found himself, for the first time in a long time, with no questions to ask. And he did not know yet why that felt like everything. The old monk had received the gift of an undamaged heart. He had become someone who could lie down at the end of the day without anything in him still arguing. Not because his life had been free of hurt. He had carried losses. He had made mistakes. He had been a young man, and now he was old. But the heart he carried was no longer carrying everything else. In Buddhist understanding, this is what the long, slow work of mind tending eventually leads to. Not powers, not visions, not the ability to do remarkable things. Something much quieter and much more rare. The capacity to be at home in oneself. The Buddha called this our birthright. Not something we had to earn from outside. Something we returned to once enough of the layers of struggle had been allowed to fall away. He pointed at it many times in his teaching. He said it was always available, in every moment. It was just that most of us did not know we could lay down what we were carrying. This was perhaps the most radical idea in his teaching, that the peace we are looking for is not somewhere far away. It is not in some special state of mind. It is not the reward for being good enough or wise enough. It is what is here, underneath, the whole time. The work is not to reach it. The work is to stop covering it over. The verse, in its 4 small qualities, points exactly to this person. The one who has come home, the undamaged heart, the set-down courtroom, the eyes open, the fear let go. Each quality is a piece of the same gift. And the gift is not for a special few. It is for any of us, on any night, who are willing to begin laying things down. The practice for tonight is small. For these few hours, lay down the inner judge. Just for tonight. We can pick it back up tomorrow, if it seems necessary. But for tonight, set it aside. There is nothing to grade. There is no test in progress. The day is over. The work is done. Whatever happened today happened. The verdicts can wait. If a worry comes up about whether you said the right thing, whether you did the right thing, whether you are a good person, gently remind yourself that the court is not in session. The judge has been excused. The case is adjourned for the night. What remains, when the judge is set down, is something the verse already named. A heart undamaged, or beginning to be. A pair of open eyes. A small, quiet alertness. And, somewhere underneath, a foundation that does not depend on the events of any given day. You do not have to deserve this. The verse does not ask whether you have earned it. It simply offers it. To anyone willing, on any night, to let the judge go home. So tonight, just for now, we let the judge go home. We let the day go. We let the heart be as it is, and the breath find its own pace. Let us rest here for a moment. Take a slow, deep breath. Notice what has begun to soften. When you are ready, we will continue. There is one verse in the Mind chapter that names something most of us have noticed about ourselves, but rarely let ourselves say plainly. It is an honest observation, given gently, about how the mind works in the dark. The Buddha was a careful teacher. He did not say hard things to wound people. He said hard things to free them. And the verse we are about to hear is one of his most freeing observations, even though, on first reading, it can sound stark. What the Buddha is going to say, in plain language, is this. Most of the trouble in our lives does not come from outside us. It comes from what our minds do with what comes from outside. The events arrive, and then the mind takes those events and turns them into something larger and longer and heavier than they ever were. This is not a verse to be afraid of. It is a verse to be relieved by. Because if our trouble is in part something we are doing, then it is in part something we can stop doing. The verse goes like this. A mind that has gone astray would do you more harm than any difficulty you could face from outside. A mind gone astray. The Buddha is not, here, speaking of a morally wandering mind. He is speaking of something much smaller and much more common. A mind that has been left alone with its own habits and has slipped into the grooves it knows best. The grooves of worry, the grooves of grievance, the grooves of replaying what cannot be unsaid or undone or unlived. We have all known a mind that has gone astray. It is the mind that wakes us at 4 a.m, replaying yesterday's conversation. The same mind that goes over and over a single sentence someone said 3 years ago. The mind that imagines a future conversation with someone we may never see again, and rehearses it 5 times before sleep finally comes. This is what the verse means by a mind gone astray. A tired mind, an untended mind, a mind doing what minds do when no one is gently watching them. And the verse makes a claim about such a mind. It says that such a mind would do you more harm than any difficulty you could face from outside. Most of us, when we first hear this, want to push back. We have known real difficulties. We have known losses, betrayals, illnesses, disappointments, griefs. Surely the Buddha cannot be saying that the worry in our own heads is worse than those. The Buddha is not denying the reality of outside difficulty. He is making a more careful claim. He is saying that, in most lives, the trouble that wears us down the most is not the difficulty itself. It is the rehearsing of it, the replaying, the thinking about it long after it has happened. A loss happens once. Grieving it happens many times. The grief is the necessary work of being human. But the rumination, the long internal chewing on what cannot be changed, is something different. It is the mind that has gone astray and is now multiplying the difficulty long after the difficulty is over. The Buddha was a careful observer. He had watched his own mind for many years. He had watched the minds of his students. He knew that when we lie awake at night, the thing keeping us awake is not usually the thing itself. It is the mind's relationship with the thing. The mind playing the same notes over and over, on the same instrument, for hours, when the song could have ended much sooner. This is one of the deepest insights in all of Buddhism. That much of our suffering is not the original event. It is the second arrow. The first arrow is the difficulty that comes from outside. The second arrow is the one we send into ourselves by replaying the first. And the second arrow, the Buddha said, is often the one that wounds us most. In Buddhist understanding, this is one of the most important distinctions in the whole path. There is the pain that life brings, which is inevitable. And there is the suffering that we add on top of it, which is not. The first cannot be avoided. The second can, slowly, be set down. And the verse we are sitting with tonight is one of the clearest pointings to this truth in all of Buddhist literature. The verse is not blaming us for this. It is pointing at it, so that we can see it, so that we have the chance, if we choose, to set down the second arrow, to let the first wound heal, to stop multiplying what was, originally, only one event. There is a kind of relief that comes with this teaching when it is heard rightly, the relief of recognizing that what is keeping us awake is not the world. It is something much smaller and much closer and much more under our influence than we knew. Let us explore a story about this. In a small town at the foot of the hills, there once lived a baker. She had built her business slowly, over many years, from a tiny stall in the market into a proper shop with 2 ovens. She made good bread. People came from neighboring towns for her loaves. When she was perhaps 30 years old, a miller from the next valley had cheated her. He had promised her a large quantity of fine flour at a fair price. She had paid him in advance, as she usually did with trusted merchants. The flour, when it came, was of much lower quality than what they had agreed on, and less in quantity than what she had paid for. She confronted the miller. He denied everything. He was a powerful man in his village, and she was a young baker just starting out. There was no court that would side with her. In the end, she absorbed the loss. It was a hard moment, but she went on. she found a better miller. She continued building her business. Her bread became famous in the region. She had 3 children. She grew older. Her hair turned silver. Her hands grew strong and steady. But every now and then, in the quiet hours, the memory of the miller would return to her. She would lie awake in the dark, going over what he had said, what she should have said in return, what she might do even now to make him understand how much harm he had caused. She would imagine confrontations, rehearse arguments, feel the old anger rise as if it were new. This had been going on for 15 years. One evening, when she was perhaps 45, she was sitting alone in her shop after closing. The ovens were cooling. The day's work was done. She poured herself a cup of tea, and as she sat, the memory of the miller came again, as it sometimes did, and she felt the familiar anger rise. But this time, something different happened. She caught herself. She thought, how many times have I had this exact conversation in my head? She had no idea. Hundreds. Thousands. She picked up a piece of paper and began to estimate. A few minutes here, 10 minutes there, sometimes an hour at night when she could not sleep. Spread out over 15 years. By her best calculation, she had spent something like 500 hours of her life replaying a single transaction that had taken less than 1 hour to occur. She sat with the number for a long time. 500 hours of her own life, spent in a small room in her head with a man who had cheated her, who almost certainly no longer remembered her, who might not even still be alive. She laughed once, a short, surprised laugh. Then she set down the paper, finished her tea, closed her shop, and walked home through the cool evening streets. The next morning when she lit the ovens, she did not think about the miller at all. And though the memory still came back sometimes, in the years that followed, it never again held her the way it had. She had given him 15 years. She would not give him another evening. The baker had been carrying an event in her mind for 15 years. The original event lasted less than an hour. The carrying lasted half her adult life. And when she finally calculated the cost, she did what most of us, when we see it clearly, eventually do. She set the carrying down, not because she had forgiven the miller, not because she had reached some grand spiritual understanding, simply because she had finally seen how much of her own life she was giving him. This is the smallest of recognitions, but it is one of the most powerful any of us can have. The mind, when it has gone astray, multiplies time. An hour becomes 500 hours. A single hurt becomes 1,000 hurts, lived 1,000 times. And we are the ones doing the multiplying all along. Let us explore another story. A traveler was making his way across a wide country, from his home village to a distant city where he had work waiting for him. He was a careful man. He had packed everything he would need for the journey: food, a blanket, a change of clothes, the letters of recommendation he would need to present in the city, a small bag of coins to live on until he received his first wages. On the 3rd day of his journey, he came to a river that had to be crossed. There was no bridge, but there was a shallow ford that travelers had used for many years. He had been told the crossing was safe, but the rains had been heavy that spring. The river was higher and faster than usual. When he was halfway across, the current took the strap of his pack. The pack tore loose from his shoulder. By the time he scrambled to the far bank, it was already gone, carried downstream. He stood on the bank and watched the river. His food was gone. His blanket. His clothes. The letters. The coins. Everything he had brought. He sat down on a rock and put his head in his hands. He did not weep, but something in him collapsed. For perhaps an hour, he stayed there. The afternoon sun moved. He did not move. He went over and over what he had lost. The letters had taken his uncle 3 months to write. The coins were the last of his savings. The blanket had been a gift from his mother. He thought of each item, and the loss of each one struck him fresh, like a separate blow. He was so caught up in this that he did not at first notice the old pilgrim sitting nearby. The old man had been there for some time, also resting from his own journey. He had a small bowl in his lap, and he was eating a piece of bread quietly. When he saw that the traveler had finally noticed him, the old pilgrim spoke. "The river took your bags," he said. The traveler nodded. "It has not taken your peace. Only you can give that away. Will you?" The traveler stared at him. He did not know what to say. The old pilgrim broke his bread in half and held out one piece. "Eat," he said. "There is more bread in the world." The traveler took the bread. He held it for a moment. Then he ate it, slowly. When he had finished, the old pilgrim spoke again. The river kept its own counsel. It took what it wanted. You and I cannot stop a river. But what you do in the next hour is yours to decide. You can sit here and lose the rest of the day to the same river that took the morning. Or you can stand up and walk on, and the river will only have taken your bags. The traveler sat for a while longer. Then he stood up. He thanked the old pilgrim. He walked on toward the city. He did not have his clothes, his letters, his savings, but he had his life. He had the road ahead, and he had a small piece of wisdom that he had not known when he set out that morning, and that he would carry the rest of his days. The river took the traveler's bags. That was the first arrow. He could not have stopped it. He could not have undone it. But what he was doing on the rock, in the long hour after the loss, was the second arrow. The thinking, the replaying, the accounting of every item, again and again. The mind had gone astray. The river had stopped taking things, but the mind was still taking from him every minute he sat there. By the end of that hour, the loss of his bags had become much smaller than the loss of his peace. The old pilgrim gave him a Buddhist teaching, even though he did not call it that. He pointed out that the river had done what rivers do. The bags were gone. That fact could not be argued with. But what the traveler did in the next hour, with his own mind, was a different matter. The mind, unlike the river, was his. This is the heart of what the verse is teaching. The events of life are not what we have the most influence over. The mind, in its response to those events, is what we can come to know and tend and slowly bring home. And when the mind comes home, the second arrow stops flying. There is only what actually happened, which was always smaller than what we had been carrying. The Buddha taught in many places that this is the true work of a contemplative life. Not to escape the world, where the river always takes something eventually, but to come home to the mind, where we have some say in what we do with what the world brings. The world is not ours. The mind, in time, becomes ours. If something is replaying in the mind tonight, something old, something you cannot change, The verse offers you a small kindness. The hurt happened once. It happened in its own time, and it was real, and it deserves to be acknowledged. But the replaying is happening now. The replaying is the second arrow. And the replaying is something the mind is doing in this moment that the mind can also stop doing. This is not about pretending the hurt did not matter. It mattered. It still matters. The work is not to deny it. The work is to notice when the mind is replaying and to choose, gently, not to feed the replaying. To say to the mind, the way the old pilgrim spoke to the traveler, the river has already taken what it took. The thinking does not bring back what is lost. The thinking only loses more of what is here. And then, breath by breath, to let the replaying pass. Not by suppressing it, by no longer agreeing to be carried by it. The thoughts may keep coming, but we no longer have to follow them down the same old paths. So tonight, if there is anything still being multiplied, anything still being replayed, this may be an hour to begin laying it down. Not all at once, just a little, just for now. Let us rest here for a moment. Take a slow, deep breath. Notice what has begun to ease. When you are ready, we will continue. The previous verse gave the mind chapter's hardest recognition, that the mind, untended, can multiply the trouble life brings. This verse, written immediately after it, is its companion, and it gives the chapter's most surprising promise. The promise has to do with companionship, with the kind of friend most of us have spent our lives looking for. The friend who is steady, who is patient, who is there in the middle of the night, who knows us well enough to comfort us when no other comfort lands. We have searched for this friend everywhere. The verse is going to tell us where this friend has been the whole time, and it is going to suggest that we have, for our whole lives, been looking past the one place that could ever have given us what we were seeking. The verse goes like this: a rightly directed mind would do you more good than your mother or father or any other relative. This is a striking thing to say. In the tradition the Buddha was speaking from, parents were honored above almost everyone. They had given you life. They had cared for you when you could not care for yourself. To say anything could be more good to you than your mother or father would have sounded almost shocking to those first listeners. And yet the Buddha said it, carefully, plainly, not as a criticism of parents, as a discovery he wanted others to share. He was not diminishing the love a parent gives. The mind we live with, when it is well tended, can become the most constant good thing in a person's life, more constant than any other love, more present in every moment than even the dearest friend can be. This is not because parents or friends are not loving. It is because they are not us. They live their own lives. They have their own concerns. They are present, but they are not always present. They love, but not at every breath. They cannot be. The mind, however, is. The mind is with us every moment of our lives. It is there in the morning when we wake. It is there at night when we lie down. It is there in the kitchen, in the long walk to work, in the moments alone we did not plan for. It is the only relationship in our lives that does not, ever, leave the room. And the verse makes a small but radical observation. Most of us have lived with this constant companion without ever considering what kind of friend it has been. We have not thought about how it talks to us. We have not noticed how it treats us in the middle of the night, or how it spoke to us the last time we made a mistake, or what it has been saying to us for the last hour of this very day. When we do begin to notice, we often realize something difficult. That the mind has not always been a good friend. That it has in many moments been harsher with us than anyone else has ever been. That the voice we have been listening to all our lives has often been the cruelest voice in the room. The verse is not blaming us for this. It is pointing at a possibility. If the mind has been a difficult companion until now, that is because it has not been tended. And when it is tended, when it is patiently, kindly, slowly turned toward us instead of against us, it becomes something else. It becomes a companion of the kind the verse names. More steady than any other love, more present than any other care. The Buddha called this the rightly directed mind. The mind that has been brought back into right relationship with itself. Not corrected, not silenced, brought home. And when the mind has come home, the verse says, it can give us what we have spent our lives looking for elsewhere. There is a saying from the Buddha himself, given to his students near the end of his life. He told them to be a lamp unto themselves, to take refuge in themselves, not because no one else mattered, but because no one else, not even the Buddha, could carry their light for them. The lamp had to be lit within. This verse points toward the same lamp. The verse is not asking us to need others less. We will still need our parents, our friends, our partners, our children. We will still love them and grieve when we lose them. The verse is not interested in taking those away. What it is doing is pointing to a relationship most of us did not know we were in. The relationship with our own mind. The one we have been having in the background our whole lives without paying attention to it. The verse is asking us, gently, to attend to it. Because the quality of that one relationship shapes the quality of everything else. Let us explore a story about this. In a small village along a river, there was once a young girl whose mother died when she was very small. She was perhaps 6 years old at the time, too young to fully understand what had happened, old enough to feel that something irreplaceable had been taken from her. After her mother's passing, she was cared for by her aunt. The aunt was an elderly woman, a sister of the girl's father, who had no children of her own. She was patient, and her hands were kind, and she had a way of looking at people that made them feel seen. The aunt, who was wise without being showy about it, knew something the little girl did not yet know. She knew that her own time would not last forever, and she knew that if the little girl was to have anyone to keep her company through the long years of life ahead, she would have to become her own good company. When I am gone, she would say to the girl, you will still have you. Make sure that you are someone you would want to be with. So the aunt did something many adults do not think to do. She did not just love the little girl. She taught her to love herself. When the girl made a mistake, the aunt would say, what would your mother have said to you if she were here right now? The girl would think for a moment and find some kind words, and the aunt would say, then say those words to yourself. They are still here. Just give them to yourself. When the girl felt sad, the aunt would say, how do you imagine your mother held you when you were a baby? Hold yourself that way now. When the girl woke at night in distress, the aunt would say, you can be a kind voice to yourself. Try it. Just for 1 minute. Try. The girl slowly learned. She did not understand at the time what she was being given. But over the years, she became someone who knew how to be gentle with herself. She knew the words to say when she was hurting. She knew the way to hold her own heart. Her aunt was building her, day by day, a companion that would last her the rest of her life. The aunt eventually passed away when the girl was perhaps 20. The girl grieved deeply, but she was not alone. She had a friend inside her, by then, that her aunt had helped build. The friend was not the aunt. It was not her mother. It was something else entirely. It was the version of herself who knew how to be kind. The version who knew the words. The version who could put a hand on her own heart in the dark. She missed her mother for the rest of her life. She missed her aunt too. But on the hardest evenings, when no one else was there, she had her own good company. And it was enough. The aunt had given the little girl one of the most enduring gifts an adult can give a child. She had taught her that the relationship with her own mind was something she could shape, something she could grow, something she had a say in. Most of us are not taught this. We grow up assuming that the way our mind speaks to us is just the way it is. We do not realize that the voice in our head, the voice that grades us and worries about us and questions us, was learned somewhere. From parents, from teachers, from the culture around us. And what was learned can, slowly, be unlearned. What was built without our awareness can be rebuilt with our awareness. This is patient work. It does not happen in a day or a week. It happens in small moments. The moment when we catch ourselves being harsh and choose a kinder word. The moment when we are tired and lift ourselves up the way we would lift a friend. The mind we make is the company we keep. The verse is telling us, gently, that the company can be very good company indeed. Let us explore another story. In a forest in the high country, there was once an old monk who lived alone in a small hut. He had been there for many decades. He had built the hut himself, when he was younger and stronger, from logs he had cut from the surrounding trees. He had a small fire pit, a sleeping mat, a clay water jar, and one wooden bowl. That was nearly everything he owned. Once or twice a year, a younger monk from the monastery in the valley below would climb the long path to bring him supplies. Rice, salt, sometimes a few oranges in the season. The visits were always brief. The old monk did not need much conversation. The young monk would unload the supplies, share a cup of tea, and head back down before dark. One such visit, in late autumn, a new young monk made the climb for the first time. He had heard about the old man, but he had never met him. He was curious. He carried the supplies up the steep path and arrived in the late afternoon to find the old monk sitting outside his hut, watching the trees. They greeted each other. They drank their tea. They sat in silence for a while. The young monk had been told that the old monk did not like to talk, but the young one was new and curious, and the silence weighed on him. Finally, he asked the question that had been on his mind for the whole climb. "May I ask you something?" he said. "Of course. Are you ever lonely up here?" The old monk did not answer right away. He looked at the trees. He looked at his hands. He looked at the small smoke rising from the fire pit. Then he looked at the young monk and laughed. It was a warm laugh, not mocking. genuinely amused. "Lonely?" he said. "Yes, you have been here for so long. There are no other people. There is no one to talk to. Do you not get lonely?" The old monk smiled, more gently. "I have lived with myself for 60 years, he said. "I know my own company. It is good company. How could I be lonely?" The young monk thought about this. He had expected the old man to say something else. Perhaps that he had transcended loneliness through meditation. Perhaps that he was lonely sometimes but had learned to bear it. The actual answer surprised him. The old monk seemed to read his face. "You think I am being clever," he said. "I am not. I am only telling you what I have found. When I was your age, I had not yet met myself. I lived with myself, but I did not know myself. Now I have known myself for a long time. We have lived together. We have walked through difficult things together. The person I am with, when I am alone here, is someone I have come to love. He is good company for me. As I am, I hope, for him." The young monk left as the light was fading. On the long walk back down through the trees, he thought about the old monk for a long time. He had come up the mountain expecting many things. He had not expected to find that the old man was, of all things, not alone. It was many years later, when the young monk had himself spent much time alone, that he understood what the old man had been telling him. The old man had not been bearing solitude. He had been keeping company with himself. There was a difference, and learning the difference, slowly, was much of what the rest of the young monk's practice would be. The young monk had come to the old monk, expecting a teaching about how to bear loneliness. What he received instead was a teaching about how to be at home in oneself. This is what the Buddha was pointing toward in the verse. Not the renunciation of relationships with other people, not the abandonment of family or friends. Something gentler than that, and something deeper. The recognition that the most constant relationship in any human life is the one we have with our own mind. We will spend our lives with many people. Some will stay near us, some will pass through. Some we will love and lose. Some we will lose and never quite stop loving. But the mind is with us all of it. Every birth, every loss, every quiet evening, every difficult morning. The mind is the only companion that does not, ever, leave the room. The Buddha was offering an extraordinary recognition that this one constant companion, the one we have not chosen and cannot send away, can be the kindest friend we will ever have. Or, if we leave it untended, it can be the harshest. The choice, in the long quiet hours, is partly ours. When we tend the mind well, when we are patient with it the way a friend is patient, it becomes, in time, the friend it could not be while we were ignoring it. This is why, in Buddhist teaching, the work of meditation is so often described as coming home. Not as going somewhere new, not as becoming something different, just as returning to a place that has always been there, that we have always been a part of, but that we had somehow forgotten was ours. The practice for tonight is small. The mind you are lying with is your oldest companion. It has been with you since you were a child. It will be with you when you are very old. It will be with you in every moment between now and then. What would you offer a friend who had been with you that long? A friend who had walked through every difficult night you had ever had? A friend who knew every secret you had ever kept? Tonight, offer that friend a small kindness. Speak to the mind, in the dark, the way you would speak to a good friend who was tired, without irritation, without rushing it, without grading its every move, just with the simple kindness of someone who knows the friend deserves it. When this becomes possible, even for a moment, the verse begins to come true. The mind, met with kindness, gives kindness back, without fail, because the kindness was, the whole time, what it was made of. So tonight, let the friendship begin, or let it continue. The mind has been waiting a long time to be met this way. Rest here. Breathe slowly. Let what has been said settle in its own time. When you are ready, we will go on together. Earlier in this chapter, we met the image of the Fletcher, the patient hand that straightens the arrow again and again until it comes into true. That image showed us one way of working with the mind, an active way, a way of returning to the work over and over. The chapter has a companion teaching for it, a teaching about another way of working with the mind, quieter than the first. The way of simply watching. These two ways belong together. They are the two hands of a balanced practice. The one we have already met does the work of adjustment. The one we are about to meet does the work of guarding. In Buddhist understanding, you cannot have one without the other for long. The hand that adjusts needs the eye that sees. Otherwise, the hand does not know what needs adjusting. The verse we are about to hear uses the word protect. Where the Fletcher's verse spoke of taming, this verse speaks of watching over the mind, the way one watches over anything precious. With care, with attention, without needing to interfere. The verse goes like this: so hard to see, so subtle, alighting where it will. The discerning protect the mind. A guarded mind leads to bliss. The verse begins with a recognition. The mind is hard to see. It is subtle. It alights where it will. What does this mean, hard to see? The mind, in its workings, is mostly hidden from us. A thought arrives, and we don't see it coming until we are already inside it. A worry forms, and by the time we notice the worry, it has already shaped our mood. An old grievance slips back in, and we find ourselves rehearsing it, having entered without remembering when. The Buddha was a careful observer of his own mind. He noticed, over many years, that the mind moves faster than the part of us that watches the mind. By the time we become aware of a thought, the thought has often already been doing its work for a few seconds. By the time we recognize a worry, the worry has already shaped some part of our mood. The mind, as the verse says, is subtle. It does its work before we have fully arrived. This is not because the mind is sneaky. It is because the mind is fast, and because most of us are not paying close enough attention to see it move. The verse is not blaming us. It is describing what is true. Then the verse gives us a response. The discerning protect the mind. Here is the heart of this verse. Where the Fletcher's verse spoke of taming, this verse speaks of protecting. The word matters. Taming suggests changing something, bringing it into a different shape. Protecting suggests something different. We do not protect a child by changing the child. We protect a child by being present, watchful, kind. We notice what is happening. We respond when we need to, and otherwise we let the child be a child. A protected mind is one that has someone watching over it, not changing it, just watching. the way a mother might sit beside a sleeping child, the way a gardener might walk the same path through his garden every morning, eyes ready, the way a shepherd might keep watch over a flock through the night, not fighting anything, just present. This is the second way of working with the mind in the chapter. The first was the Fletcher's active hand. This one is the watchful eye. And the eye, in Buddhist understanding, comes first. Before we can adjust the arrow, we have to see the bend. Before we can return the mind to the breath, we have to notice it has wandered. The eye is the foundation of all the other work. In the Buddhist tradition, this kind of attention is one of the oldest forms of practice. It is called by many names: mindfulness in some traditions, witness consciousness in others, bare attention in still others. But under all the names, it is the same gesture. Look, see. Do not interfere unless interference is needed. Stay present. There is something the Buddha noticed about this kind of watching. He noticed that the mind, when it is watched gently, changes. Not because we have told it to change, because it has been seen. This is true of most things in life. A child who feels seen by a parent grows differently than a child who does not. A friend who feels heard relaxes differently than a friend who does not. The mind, similarly, settles when it is simply noticed, without correction or pushing. This is one of the more surprising findings of long Buddhist practice. That much of what we used to think required adjustment, fixing, effort, actually only required attention. The work was not to change anything. The work was simply to see clearly. And in being seen, many things resolved themselves without our needing to do anything more. The verse promises that a mind protected this way leads to bliss. The same bliss the chapter has named before. The bliss of a mind that is no longer at war with itself. The bliss that comes from simple, attentive companionship with one's own mind. Let us explore a story about this. In a small village, there was once an old gardener who tended a plot at the edge of his cottage. It was not a large garden. It produced enough vegetables to feed him and his wife, with a little extra to share with neighbors. There were carrots and onions and beans climbing up tall sticks. There was a small patch of medicinal herbs near the door. For more than 40 years, the old man had walked the same path through his garden every morning, just after dawn. He did not work in the garden every morning. Sometimes he worked. Sometimes he just walked. A young neighbor, who had recently begun keeping a garden of his own, was impressed by the old man's plot. The young man's garden, by comparison, was always struggling. The weeds overran it. The vegetables fought for space. One morning, the young neighbor came over to ask the old gardener for advice. He was full of frustration. "I work hard at my garden," he said. "I pull weeds for hours every weekend. I dig, and still it is overrun. How do you keep your garden so clean? You do not seem to work as hard as I do." The old man laughed gently. He motioned for the young man to walk with him through the rows. As they walked, the old man pointed at the ground. "Look here," he said. The young neighbor looked. He saw nothing, just a small patch of soil between 2 rows of carrots. "Look more carefully." The young man squatted down. He looked closely. Eventually he saw it. A single weed, no bigger than a small leaf, just barely sprouted from the soil. The old gardener bent down and pinched the tiny weed out between his fingers. He held it up, and then dropped it on the path. "There," he said. "Done." The young man stared. "But there must be 100 such tiny weeds in my garden right now." "Probably," said the old gardener. "And by next week, those 100 will be 100 large weeds. You will pull them out and break your back doing it, and they will come back, because by then their roots will be deep." He pointed again at where the small weed had been. This one had no root. It came out without resistance. It will not come back. I have just done a minute's work that would have been an hour's work in 3 weeks, and an afternoon in 3 months. The young man understood, finally, why the rows were so clean. The old man was not working harder. He was working at a different stage. "I walk through here every morning," the old gardener said. "I am not really working. I am just watching. The weeds tell me where they are. I take them out before they have time to become anything. By the time you see them in your garden, they have already won. I rarely have to do damage control." The young neighbor went home that morning with a new way of seeing his garden. And though it took him many seasons to retrain his habits, his garden eventually became as healthy as the old man's. By doing less. By seeing earlier. The old gardener was not just teaching the young man about gardens. He was teaching him about almost everything in life. About relationships. About habits. About the mind. Most of us, when we try to work on something difficult, work on it the way the young man worked on his garden. We wait until the difficulty is large. We confront it. We try to root it out. By the time we engage with it, it has already done much of its work in us. The old gardener taught a different way. The way of watching, of paying attention so closely that you catch things while they are still small. When something is small, it can be taken out with almost no effort, without resistance, without damage. The verse is suggesting this is also true of thoughts, of moods, of the small movements of the mind that, if left to grow, become the storms that wake us at 3 in the morning. This is one of the quieter teachings in the mind chapter. It does not promise the mind will stop having thoughts or that worries will never arise. It promises something different, that worries, noticed early enough, do not have to become storms. The storms come, in most lives, only when the small movements have been ignored for too long. The verse is teaching us to notice the small movements. Let us explore another story. In a small house at the edge of a town, there was a mother whose youngest child had been ill for several days. He was perhaps 3 years old. The illness was not severe, but it had brought a fever, and the child had been restless and frightened. On the 3rd night of the fever, the mother sat beside the small bed where the child lay sleeping. She had a candle. She had a cup of tea. She had a blanket around her shoulders because the night was cool, and she had nothing else to do. The doctor had been. The medicine had been given. The fever was beginning to break. She sat. The child breathed. The candle burned slowly down. She was not doing anything. She had no chores. She was not even thinking very much. She was just there. After a while, the child stirred. He made a small sound in his sleep. The mother looked at him. She did not need to do anything. The sound was nothing. The child was safe. She watched. She returned to her tea. A few minutes later, the child stirred again. This time his face wrinkled, as if a difficult dream were coming. The mother set down her cup. She placed her hand very gently, on his small forehead. The forehead was cool. The fever was leaving. The mother stayed where she was, with her hand resting lightly on her son's brow, for as long as the small wrinkles remained. Then she removed her hand. The child's face had smoothed. He went on sleeping. The hours of the night passed in this way. The mother did very little. She was a presence in the room. Her child rested under that presence. And when, in the morning, the child woke with the fever fully gone, the mother realized she had done one of the most important things she could possibly have done. She had been there, through the long, quiet hours, watching. This is, perhaps, the oldest kind of practice in the world. Older than meditation. Older than any tradition. The practice of watching over what we love. The mother in the story did not have to do much. The fever was already breaking. The medicine had already been given. What she gave the child was something else. Something that mattered just as much in the night. The simple, attentive presence of someone who was there. Someone watching. The verse is asking us to be that watchful presence for our own mind, not as judge or fixer, but as the steady, quiet attention that knows the mind well and is there in the night when it stirs. Not to interfere, just to be near, just to see. The mother in the story was not controlling her child. She was not trying to make the child sleep differently, or breathe differently, or dream differently. She was just there, present to whatever happened, ready to respond if something needed responding to. Otherwise, watching. This is, in Buddhist understanding, the highest form of presence. Not because nothing is happening, but because the presence is so steady that nothing needs to be managed. The watcher and the watched, the mother and the child, are in a kind of agreement. The child can rest deeply because the mother is there. The mother can rest in her own presence because the child is safe. A guarded mind is like this. It is not a mind under management or supervision. It is a mind that has someone present to it, knowingly, kindly, who notices what arises and stays there with it. Most of the time, the mind, knowing it is seen, settles on its own. Rarely, the presence will need to do something. Mostly, the presence is enough. This is one of the great recognitions of the Buddhist path. That what most of us thought required control actually only required attention. We do not have to manage the mind. We just have to be present to it. The mind will rest more deeply under the steady gaze of someone who loves it than under the strict hand of someone trying to make it behave. In every Buddhist tradition, this watching is given a central place. Different schools name it differently: knowing, witnessing, just sitting, natural awareness. But under all the names, it is the same gesture. To see clearly what is happening without needing to change it. To stay present with what is without rushing toward what should be. Tonight, the mind will do what minds do. Thoughts will arise. Old habits will stir. Quiet worries will float up out of the dark and try to find a foothold. When they do, the work is not to push them away, or fight them, or argue with them. It is to see them, just to see them, as the gardener sees the small weed before it has rooted, as the mother sees the small wrinkle of distress on her child's face before it becomes a dream, as the watchful eye of someone who has come to know this mind well and is no longer surprised by what it does. The seeing itself is the protection. When a thought arises and you see it, The seeing has already done most of the work. The thought, met by attention, often dissolves before it can build. The worry, noticed early, often disperses before it can spread. And if a thought does not dissolve when you see it, that is all right. Some thoughts are larger than that. Some need longer attention. The work is the same. Watch it. See what it is. Let it move through. The watching does not have to chase the thought away. The watching just has to be present while the thought is here. In time, the thought will go. Most of them always do. You do not have to do anything more than watch. Watch with kindness, without judgment, the way a mother watches a sleeping child. That is everything. So tonight, simply watch. The breath, the thoughts, whatever moves through. Settle here for a moment. Let the breath grow slow. Let the watching continue on its own. When you are ready, we will go on. There is a verse in the Mind chapter that, when you first hear it, sounds almost like a description from a poem. The Buddha uses 4 small phrases to point at what the mind is. Each phrase is short. Each one names something different. And together, they describe something most of us have never tried to put into words. The verse is best heard slowly. The phrases land best when they are allowed to drift, the way the mind itself drifts through the long quiet hours. What is being named, in the verse, is the mystery of the inner life, the strange fact that each of us carries a whole world inside us, a world no one else has ever seen, a world that travels everywhere we travel and goes places we never physically go and is always with us, no matter what. The verse describes this inner world and then offers, at its end, a small promise about the freedom that becomes possible when we have come to know it. The verse goes like this: wandering far, alone, incorporeal, hidden in the heart, those who tame the mind are freed from old habits. The verse opens with a description of how the mind moves. Wandering far, it says, the mind, in any given hour, may travel to places the body has never been. We can be in our bed and also, at the same moment, in our childhood kitchen. We can be reading a book and also, somehow, walking on a beach we have never seen. We can be sitting quietly and also, in another part of ourselves, having a conversation with someone we have not seen in many years. This is one of the strangest facts about being human, but most of us never pause to notice it. The mind travels at no speed, with no fuel, to no actual destination. It never arrives anywhere, because there is no place for it to arrive. And yet it goes, all the time, every hour of every day. It goes when we are awake and when we are asleep, whether we have asked it to be still or asked it to be quiet. The Buddha called this wandering far. He was not blaming the mind for doing it. He was simply naming it. As a fish swims, the mind wanders. It is in its nature. Now the second quality, the mind wanders alone. This is the verse's gentlest claim, and also its most lonely. Each of us has our own mind. No one else can be inside it. No one else has ever been inside it. The thoughts that arise in your mind right now are arising in a place that no other person has ever entered. This is true even of those who love us most. No one else has ever entered our mind. Not our parents, not our partners, not our closest friends. They have known what we have told them. They have guessed at the rest. But the mind itself, the inner room where the thoughts happen, has only one occupant. This sounds like a hard thing, but the verse, by saying it plainly, also offers a small comfort. We have always thought we were the only ones who knew our own mind. We did not realize this was true of everyone. Every person on earth, every person who has ever lived, has been alone inside their own mind. The loneliness, when seen this way, is not personal. It is universal. We share it, even though we cannot share it. The third quality. The mind is incorporeal. It has no body. It has no shape. It does not weigh anything. If a surgeon opened the skull, they would not find it. They would find the brain. They would not find the mind. The mind, in the verse, is something different from the brain. It is something that has no substance, no location, no edges. And yet it is real. It feels, it thinks, it dreams. It remembers and hopes and worries and loves, all without weighing anything, all without taking up any space. This is one of the strange recognitions of careful contemplation. You can spend your life with your mind and never see it directly. You can only watch what it does. There is something in there, feeling and thinking and remembering, but the something itself has no edge for you to find. It is everywhere you look and nowhere you can point. The fourth quality. The mind is hidden in the heart. The Buddha used the word heart not to mean the muscle that pumps blood. He used it to mean the deep inner place, the cave, the center where the mind lives, the place that no one else, including us, sees clearly. Most of us have not even gone into it ourselves, not really, not for long. The mind is hidden there, waiting, living its own life, doing its own work, going about its own days, often without our paying much attention to it at all. And then the verse offers its quiet promise. Those who tame the mind are freed from old habits. The verb here is tame. The same word as in the verse about the Fletcher. The slow, patient bringing of a wild thing into kindness with itself. And the promise is that when this happens, when the mind has been gently brought into kindness with itself, an unexpected gift arrives. Old habits begin to fall away. These are the habits we have all carried. The way we have always been hard on ourselves. The way we have always responded to small disappointments. The way we have always lain awake at night, thinking the same things. The verse promises that these are not permanent. They are old habits, learned in a particular mind, and a mind that has been tamed begins, slowly, to outgrow them. Let us explore a story about this. A man and his small grandson were sitting on the porch of a house at the end of a long summer afternoon. The man was perhaps 70 years old. The boy was perhaps 4. They had been sitting together in silence for some time. The boy had been kicking his legs against the wooden railing, watching a beetle make its way across a board. After a while, the boy turned to his grandfather and asked, "Grandpa, where do thoughts come from?" The old man did not answer right away. He was a man who had grown up in a village, who had worked his whole life on the same farm, who had buried 2 wives and 3 friends, and who had become, late in life, a careful watcher of his own mind. The boy's question was, he realized, one of the most important questions he had ever been asked. He thought for a long time before he answered. "Well," he said at last, "I have wondered about that my whole life, and I still do not know." The boy nodded seriously. He seemed to find this answer satisfactory. "But I will tell you what I have come to think," the grandfather went on. When a thought comes to you, it comes from a place no one else has ever seen. Not your mother, not me, not anyone. It comes from a place that is yours alone. A place inside you that no one will ever go but you. Even Mama can't see my thoughts. Not one of them. She can guess what you are thinking. She can love you very much. But your thoughts are yours. They live in a place that has just one door, and only you have the key. The boy thought about this for a long time. The afternoon was growing late. The beetle had reached the end of the board and dropped over the edge. "That sounds lonely," the boy said. The old man smiled. "It is, a little. But here is what I have learned. In all these years, everyone has a place like that. Your grandmother had one, and so did my old friend Charlie, and the president of our country has one, and even the strangest people in the world. We are all alone in our minds. Which means, in a way, we are not alone at all. We are all the same kind of alone, together." The boy did not understand this fully, but he sensed that it was important. He kicked his legs against the railing for a while longer. Then he leaned over and rested his small head against his grandfather's shoulder. "Grandpa," he said, "if we are all alone in our minds, then who is in there with us?" The old man considered. He was not sure how to answer. After a moment, he said, "Whoever you choose to bring with you. The people you love. The kind words they have said to you. The good memories. All of that goes in with you. The mind is its own room, but you do not have to be alone in it." The boy nodded. He stayed leaning against his grandfather. They watched the sun begin to drop behind the field. Neither of them said anything more, but both of them, for the rest of their lives, would remember that conversation. The grandfather had pointed his grandson at one of the deepest facts about being human, that each of us lives, all our lives, inside a private inner world that no one else will ever see, and that this is true of everyone. In Buddhist understanding, this recognition is itself a kind of practice. When we begin to see clearly that everyone is alone in their own mind, we also begin to see how much each person carries that we will never know about. Even those who love us most are alone, finally, in the inner room they live in. And the kindness we extend, when we extend it, lands inside a place we will never see, but which is real and which receives. Let us explore another story. In a monastery in the high country, there once lived a monk who had been practicing for 40 years. When he was young, he had been very serious about his practice. He had sat for long hours. He had read many books. He had asked many questions of his teachers. And in every meditation session, when he rose from his cushion, he had judged himself. Was that focused? Was that good? Did I drift too much? Did I sit well today? He had not noticed, when he was young, that this judging was itself something he did. He had thought it was just part of the practice. The judging happened in his mind as naturally as the breath happened in his body. He continued like this for many years. He sat. He judged. He sat. He judged. The judging was so much a part of him that it had no name. But the monastery had taught him, over the years, something else. To watch. To pay attention to what his mind was doing. To bring kindness, gradually, to whatever he found there. He brought this kindness, slowly, to many things, to his impatience with younger monks, to his disappointment with himself when something did not go well, to the small annoyances of monastic life. And in each place, the kindness softened something. But the judging of his meditation he did not bring kindness to. He had not noticed it. It was too close to him. It hid in the very act of practicing. He grew old. His hair turned white. His knees got stiff. He sat anyway. One afternoon, in his late 60s, he finished a meditation session. He rose from his cushion. He stretched. He picked up his bowl and walked out toward the kitchen for the evening meal. Halfway down the corridor, he stopped. Something was different. He could not at first say what. He stood very still in the corridor, trying to find it. After a moment, he realized. He had not judged the meditation. He had finished it, gotten up, and walked away. There had been no inner verdict, no assessment, no grading. He stood in the corridor and tried to remember the last time he had judged a meditation. He could not remember. It had been a long time, perhaps years. The old habit had left him at some point, quietly, when he was not looking. It had not announced its departure. It had not waited to say goodbye. The old monk laughed. He laughed in the corridor. A young monk passing by gave him a curious look, but did not stop. He went on to dinner that evening. He sat with the other monks. He ate his simple meal. He did not say anything, but for the rest of his days, he carried, as a quiet treasure, the memory of the afternoon when he discovered that an old habit had left him, on its own, without his needing to fight it. The work he had been doing, all those years, of watching with kindness, had been the work that did it. The old monk discovered something the Buddha had named 25 centuries earlier. That an old habit, watched kindly for long enough, eventually loosens its grip without our needing to force it. The watching is the work. The releasing happens on its own. This is one of the deeper teachings in the Buddhist path. Most of us, when we want to be rid of a habit, try to push it away. We use willpower, make resolutions, try to be different than we are. And sometimes, for a little while, it works. But the old habit usually returns. Pushing something away is not the same as ceasing to need it. What the monk had been doing for 40 years was something different. He had not been pushing his habits away. He had been watching them with kindness, without trying to fight them. And in being watched, the habits had slowly stopped having a place to grow. The Buddha's promise that those who tame the mind are freed from old habits is not a promise of overnight change. It is a promise that something else happens, more slowly, when we take up the long work of watching our own mind. The habits we have lived with for years begin, without our knowing exactly when, to lose their hold. The freeing happens, often without ceremony, often without our being there to see it go. Tonight, you do not have to do anything with the mind. It will wander as it wanders. It will quiet as it quiets. The verse asks one thing only, and that is to know the mind a little better than you did before. To know it well enough to recognize it as your own. The same wandering mind the verse named, alone, hidden, mysterious, yours. To know it as a presence, not a problem. To know it the way the grandfather knew the boy's question. With wonder, with patience, with the recognition that this thing inside you is mysterious and also yours. And as for the old habits the verse promises freedom from, they will not leave tonight. Or they may, in some small way, begin to. The work that loosens them is the kindness you bring to your own mind, again and again, over time. Not in one night, over many. Over the slow accumulation of nights when, instead of fighting the mind, you sat with it. So tonight, simply be with it. In the dark, in the quiet. Let it wander, be alone, be hidden in the heart, doing whatever hidden things minds do. You are not in charge of any of it. You did not invent the mind, nor decide its qualities. The Buddha did not invent these things either. He simply named them so that we could see clearly what we have been living with. And what we have been living with, when we see it clearly, can become something we are slowly at peace with. Not a problem to solve, but a mystery to live alongside. Stay here, in the quiet. Let the breath grow slow. Let the mind wander or rest as it will. When you are ready, we will continue. There is a verse in the Mind chapter that uses one of the most vivid images in the entire Dhammapada. The image is of a fish out of water. A fish that has been pulled up onto the bank, or thrown ashore by a wave, or caught in a tide pool that is drained. The fish flips. The fish flops. It struggles with great urgency to find its way back to where it belongs. The Buddha looked at this image and saw, in it, a description of the mind in distress. The mind in those hours when it is flailing, when it cannot find its rest, when something is wrong and it does not know how to fix the wrongness, and so it just keeps moving, urgently, trying to find its way home. The verse is tender. It does not blame the fish or the mind. It simply notices, with great care, that this is what minds sometimes do. Most of us, at some point, have known a mind like this. The verse gives us a different way to see what is happening when our own mind is flipping and flopping in the night. The verse goes like this: like a fish out of water, thrown up on dry land, this mind flips and flops, trying to find its way home. There is something striking about this image. Most of the verses in the Mind chapter use gentle metaphors. The fletcher, the craftsman, the watchful eye. This one is different. It chooses something visceral, something anyone who has ever stood by a river has seen. A fish on the bank does not look serene or peaceful or meditating. It is flipping. It is flopping. It is throwing itself against the ground with what must be tremendous urgency, all to get back to where it can breathe. And the Buddha says, plainly, that the mind does this too. When the mind is in distress, this is what it does. It flips. It flops. It throws itself urgently against whatever ground it has been left on. It does not know how to be still on dry land. It was not made for dry land. It is not at home there. It is trying with everything it has to get back to where it can breathe. This is the image the Buddha gave us. And, surprisingly, it is a kind image. He is not blaming the mind for flipping. He understands, with the kind of compassion only long practice can give, that this is what happens when something has been pulled out of its element. What is the mind's element? What is the water it has been pulled from? The mind's natural element is presence, rest, the simple, awake quality of being here, in this body, in this breath, in this moment. When the mind is in its element, it is not flipping and flopping. It is breathing easily in the only home it has ever had. What pulls the mind out of this home? Many things. A worry that arrives without warning, an old memory at 3 a.m, a piece of news that lands badly, an anticipation of tomorrow. Anything that pulls the mind away from the present and into the future or the past can become a kind of shore. When the mind is on this shore, it does what fish do. It flails. It flips. It flops. It throws itself at the problem again and again, trying to find some way to solve it, to fix it, to figure it out. It cannot rest. It cannot breathe easily. It is out of its element. The verse is not asking us to make the mind stop flipping. That would be like asking the fish to stop flipping while it is on the bank. The fish cannot stop. The flipping is what it does when it is out of water. The verse is asking us to do something different, to recognize what is happening, to see the mind in distress with the eyes of someone who understands, to respond with the kindness one would have for a flailing fish rather than with annoyance, and, when we can, to return the mind gently to its element, to bring it back to the water, to the breath, to the body, to the simple, present moment where it can breathe again. In the Buddhist tradition, this is one of the great recognitions, that the mind has a home. It is not somewhere we have to invent. It is not somewhere we have to earn. It is the simple, present awareness that is always available in any moment. Most of us have been away from it for so long that we have forgotten it is there. We think the flipping is the natural state. We think the urgency is just what minds do. But the urgency is not natural. It is what the mind does when it is far from home. There is something the verse is asking of us, beyond the practical instruction. It is asking us to look at our own minds, in their hardest hours, with the eye of someone who has seen a fish on the bank. With compassion, with recognition, with the understanding that the suffering of the flailing creature is not a moral failing. It is the suffering of something that has been pulled from where it belonged. When we look at our own anxious mind this way, something shifts. The mind that has been judging itself harshly for being anxious gets a different look. A look of recognition. A look that says, "Oh, you are a fish out of water. No wonder you are flipping. Let us see if we can find the water again." Let us explore a story about this. In a small village by a slow brown river, there lived a little girl who liked to walk along the bank in the evenings. She was perhaps 8 years old. Her mother allowed her to go alone because the village was safe and because the girl had been walking that path since she could walk at all. The girl knew the river well. She knew its turns, its smooth flat rocks, the willow that leaned out over the water. One evening, as she was walking back toward home, she heard a small sound, a wet, soft sound like something hitting the ground. She looked. On the path ahead of her was a small silver fish. It was flipping, twisting itself one way and the other with all its small strength, trying to get back to the water. The girl did not know how the fish had gotten there, and she did not stop to wonder. She crouched down. The fish was small enough to fit in her 2 hands. She picked it up carefully. The fish kept flipping in her hands. It did not understand that she was trying to help. It only knew that it was out of water and needed to be back in. The flipping was urgent. It did not stop. The girl walked, as quickly as she could without dropping the fish, to the edge of the river. She knelt down in the soft grass. She lowered her hands, with the fish in them, into the slow brown water. For one moment, the fish was still. Then, with a small flick, it slipped from her hands and disappeared into the river. The girl stayed kneeling on the bank for a few minutes more. The water moved by, slowly. She could not see the fish. She would never see the fish again. But she knew that, somewhere in the river, the fish was breathing again. The flipping had stopped. The desperation had stopped. The fish was home. She walked the rest of the way back to her village in the soft evening light. When she got home, her mother asked her how her walk had been. She thought about telling her mother about the fish, but it was a quiet thing, and she was not sure how to put it into words. So she just said it had been good. That night, when she lay in bed, she thought about the fish. She thought about how, when the fish had been on the path, it had not known that anyone was coming to help. It had only known that it was out of water. It had only known that something was very wrong, and it had to do something, urgently, to fix it. And the flipping was all it could do. She thought about herself. She was 8 years old, and she did not have words for many things. But she knew that she, too, sometimes felt urgent in a way she could not name. She knew that sometimes, in the dark, her own mind seemed to flip and flop, looking for something it could not find. And she wondered, just for a moment, if someone, somewhere, would come along and pick her up gently and carry her back to the water. She fell asleep before she finished the thought. The river moved by, in the dark, just outside her window. The girl had done, instinctively, what the verse asks of us. She had seen a creature in distress and recognized that the distress was not its fault. She had not stopped to lecture the fish or judge it for flipping. She had simply picked it up with great gentleness and brought it back to where it could breathe. The verse is asking us to do this for our own mind. In its hardest hours, when it is flailing in the dark, to recognize what is happening, to know that the urgency is not a moral failing, to know that the mind is simply out of its element, and to bring it back with the same kindness the girl brought to the fish, to the water it remembers. This is one of the gentlest practices in the mind chapter. It does not ask us to fix anything. It only asks us to recognize. Let us explore another story. In a small house in a quiet town, there lived a woman who had been an anxious sleeper for most of her life. She was perhaps 60 years old. Many of her nights, for many years, had been spent lying awake with a mind that would not rest. When she was young, she had fought the anxiety. She had argued with it. She had tried to reason it away. She had told herself that her worries were silly, that she was being weak, that she should just go to sleep. None of this had ever worked. In her 40s, she had read books, tried techniques, counted sheep, counted backward from 100, recited lists, named the things she was grateful for. Some of these had helped, a little. None of them had changed the underlying weather of her nights. But somewhere in her 50s, she had encountered a teaching that had changed something. She had read, in an old book of Buddhist sayings, an image of the mind as a fish out of water. She had read it slowly. She had recognized something in it that she had not recognized in any of the techniques. The image had been kind to the mind. It had not blamed the fish for flipping. She had thought about that image, on and off, for many months. Now, in her 60s, when she lay awake with her anxious mind, she did something she had not done in her younger years. She talked to her mind, not out loud, just in the dark, in her head, the way you might whisper to a small animal in distress. She would say, "Oh, you are flipping again, my friend. I see you. I know. You are out of water. You are out of your element." She would notice the urgency of her thoughts, the way they wanted to solve something that could not be solved at 3 in the morning, the way they were trying, with great effort, to get her somewhere she could breathe. She would say, "There is nowhere to go right now. There is nothing to do at this hour. The water is right here, in the breath, in the body, in this bed. Come back. Come back to the water." She did not always quiet right away after doing this. Sometimes the mind kept flipping, but it flipped less violently. It flipped for less long. And, slowly, over months, she noticed that her nights had become softer. The mind still came to the shore sometimes. It had not stopped doing what minds do, but she had stopped fighting it. She had started meeting it, and that had made all the difference. She thought, sometimes, of how a child might find a fish on a path and, without thinking, simply put it back in the water. The kindness would be immediate. The child would not need to be told what to do. The kindness would just happen, because nothing in the child resisted it. And she thought that, perhaps, she had had to learn, late in life, what some part of her had already known long ago. The woman in the second story had spent decades learning what the little girl in the first knew naturally. That the mind in distress is not a problem to be argued with. It is a creature in difficulty that needs to be picked up gently and returned to its water. In Buddhist understanding, this gentle return is itself the practice. We do not need to figure out why the mind is distressed. We do not need to solve the underlying problem or wait for the mind to stop being distressed. We just need to remember, in the moment, what the mind's element is, and to return there, breath by breath. The element is not far. It is not somewhere we have to go. It is here, in the breath, in the body, in the small, ordinary room with its dark and its quiet. When the mind comes home to this, even briefly, the flipping eases. Sometimes it stops. Sometimes it continues for a while, more gently. Either is all right. The verse does not promise that the mind will never be a fish out of water again. It promises that we have somewhere to bring it back to, that the water is always nearby, that coming home is always possible, even at 3 in the morning, even on the hardest nights. Tonight, if the mind starts flipping, remember the fish. You do not have to do anything heroic. You do not have to fix the flipping or argue with the mind about why it should be calmer. You only have to recognize what is happening. Oh, this is the mind out of water. This is the same image the Buddha was pointing at 2,500 years ago. This is what minds sometimes do. And then, gently, you can bring the mind back to its element. The water is right here. It is the breath, the body against the bed, the dark room, the simple, ordinary fact of being here in this moment. The mind may resist coming back. That is fine. The fish in the girl's hands resisted being held too. It did not understand that she was helping. The mind may flip a few more times before it remembers where it is. That is fine. You can hold it gently until it does. If the flipping starts again later in the night, you can do this again. There is no limit on returns. The water is always there. The bringing back is always available. The mind is welcome to come home every time it has left, for as many times as it leaves. Tonight, that is enough. To recognize and to return. So tonight, you have somewhere to bring the mind back to when it forgets. Stay in the water. Let the breath grow slow. When you are ready, we will go on together. We have come to the end of the mind chapter. There are 11 verses in all, and we have walked through 8 of them tonight. We have met the Fletcher, and the wandering mind, and the inner court that grades us, and the mind that has gone astray, and the friend we have been looking for, and the watchful eye, and the mind that travels alone, and the fish on the bank. Now, at the very end of the chapter, we are going to return to 3 of those verses. The 3 that, when held together, describe the whole journey of working with one's own mind. The 3 that name, in plain words, what the chapter has been teaching us all along. The first is the recognition. The mind is hard to tame. The second is the method. We tend it, gently, the way a Fletcher tends an arrow. The third is the promise. When the mind has been tended, it becomes the most reliable friend we have ever known. We have heard these verses before, in their own modules. Tonight, we return to them in a different way. Slower, closer to sleep, with the kind of recognition that comes only at the end of a journey. Tonight, we are not learning anything new. We are gathering, taking what has already been said and laying it alongside each other so that the shape of the chapter becomes clear, so that what was given to us, piece by piece, can be seen as one whole. The first verse we return to is one we heard near the start of the chapter. A mind that's hard to subdue, swift, alighting where it will. It is good to tame the mind. A tamed mind brings happiness. We met this verse on our first module of the night. The young weaver in the small village, who could not sleep, who learned to greet her thoughts like guests. The 2 old friends comparing the way each of them had come to live with their own restless minds. The recognition the verse offers is simple. The mind, untended, will move where it wants. It will not be still on command. It will not be quiet just because we ask it to be. This is not a flaw in us. It is what minds do. The promise of the verse is small and important. The mind can be tamed, not silenced, not erased. Tamed in the gentle sense the Buddha meant, brought into kindness with itself. And when this happens, the verse says, the mind brings happiness. Not because the mind has stopped moving, but because the moving is no longer at war with itself. This was the first thing the chapter wanted us to know. That the mind we have been living with is workable. That it can be tamed. That it will not always behave, but that it will, slowly, become kinder to its own owner. And in that kindness lies the happiness most of us have spent our lives looking for. This recognition is the seed of everything that comes after. Until we see clearly that the mind is the way it is, we will keep trying to make it different than it is, and we will keep failing. The verse gives us permission to stop fighting that fight. The mind is hard to subdue. It is swift. It alights where it will. These are not problems to solve. They are facts about what minds are. The verse names them so that we can finally stop pretending otherwise. The second verse we return to is one we heard later, the verse of the Fletcher. The mind quivers and shakes, hard to guard, hard to curb. The discerning straighten it out, like a Fletcher straightens an arrow. We met this verse in the second module of the night. The old Fletcher who worked slowly on a single arrow. The apprentice who learned, eventually, that his master had not been teaching him about arrows at all. The young monk in the high monastery, who came to see that the bringing back was the practice. The method the verse offers is not heroic. It is small and patient. The long, slow work of returning to the breath, to the moment, to this body, in this bed, in this dark room. We have done this returning many times in our lives, even when we did not know we were doing it. The small moments of noticing the mind has wandered, of catching ourselves in worry, of setting down a thought that did not help. Each was a small return. Each was a straightening of the arrow. The verse promises that this is the path. Not a single moment of insight. Many small returns. Each return is the work itself. And the bliss, if it comes, is not at the end of all the returnings. It is inside each one. The kindness with which we bring ourselves home is itself the homecoming. This is the verse that has, perhaps, kept the mind chapter alive for 2,500 years. The image is so concrete. Anyone can see it. A craftsman, his hands worn, working slowly. Nothing more. And inside that small image is everything we need to know about how to be patient with our own mind. And the third verse, the one we heard in the fifth module of the night. A rightly directed mind would do you more good than your mother or father or any other relative. We met this verse through the story of a young girl whose mother died when she was small, and the aunt who taught her to be her own good company. And again through the old monk in the forest who, after 60 years, said simply, "I know my own company. It is good company. How could I be lonely?" This verse is the promise of all the work we have been doing. That when the mind has been tended, when we have walked with it kindly through many years, it becomes the friend we have been looking for our whole lives. Not somewhere outside us. Inside. In the same body. In the same heart. This is perhaps the most surprising of the chapter's teachings. That the relationship we have been looking for, in everyone we have ever loved, can also be found in this one place that is always with us. The mind we live with, when it is no longer at war with itself, becomes our most steady companion. The friend who never leaves the room. The friend who is here, even now, listening to these words alongside us. Many people, when they first hear this verse, do not believe it. The claim is too large. The promise is too generous. But every contemplative tradition in the world has eventually arrived at some version of it. That the mind, well tended, becomes the truest companion any of us will ever have. That what we have been searching for, outside, was inside the whole time. The Dhammapada, in this one small verse, says it as plainly as anyone has ever said it. Let us explore one final story. In a small house in a quiet town, on a winter night many years ago, there lived an old woman who had been awake for some time. She was perhaps 75 years old. Her husband had died several years before. Her children were grown and lived in other towns. She lived alone in the small house, with a cat and a kitchen she loved, and a window that looked out at a maple tree. On this particular night, she had gone to bed at the usual hour. She had read for a little while by the lamp on her bedside table. She had said good night to the cat, who slept at her feet. She had turned off the lamp. And then the mind had begun. It had started with a small worry about the cat's appetite over the past few days. From there, it had moved to a memory of her husband, which brought tears. The tears called up a regret about a conversation she had had with her daughter the week before. The regret stirred a fear about getting older. The fear summoned a list of things she needed to do the next day, none of which were urgent. This had taken perhaps 15 minutes. By the end of it, the mind was wide awake. The body was ready for sleep, but the mind had decided otherwise. In her younger years, she would have fought this. She would have grown frustrated, argued with the worries, lain there tense, urging herself to fall asleep and growing more upset as the night wore on. But she was not in her younger years. In the long years of her marriage, and the long years of being a mother, and the long years of working in a kindergarten classroom, she had slowly learned a few things. She had learned them from books, from her own grandmother who had been wise, from the long, quiet hours of an ordinary life. She did not call what she had learned by any special name. She did not think of herself as a meditator or a contemplative. She was just an old woman who had lived a long time. But on this particular night, what she did was this. She noticed, first, that the mind had been wandering. She did not judge it for this. The mind wanders. She had known this for many years. It was, she had come to think, almost the definition of having a mind. She noticed the wandering, without making it a problem. Then she did what she had learned to do. She brought the mind, gently, back to where she was. The feeling of the blanket against her hands, the soft weight of the cat at her feet, the quiet sound of the wind outside in the maple tree, the simple fact that she was here, in this bed, in this room, on this winter night. The mind, of course, wandered off again, almost immediately. Off to a memory, then a worry, then a list of things. She brought it back. It wandered off again. She brought it back. She did this many times. She did not count. She did not grade herself for how often the mind wandered. She just kept doing what she had learned to do. Like a fletcher with an arrow. Many small returns. Each return a small kindness. After a while, something began to happen that she had come to know well. The mind, slowly, started to settle, not because she had forced it, because it had been brought home, kindly, enough times that it had begun to trust that home was where it would be brought. She noticed something else too. The mind that was being brought home, again and again, was not exactly her enemy anymore. It was something gentler than that. A friend who had been wandering, slowly coming back to the room. She lay in the dark and felt, for a few minutes, what she had felt many times in her later years. The simple, ordinary fact that she was not alone. The mind in her was something she had come to know and to love. Something that, for all its restlessness, was good company in the long, quiet hours. She did not call this anything. She did not name it as a Buddhist experience, or a spiritual moment, or anything at all. She just lay in the dark with her cat in her small house, with her own kind mind for company. After a while, she settled into rest. It was not a triumphant rest. It was just rest. The cat shifted. The maple tree moved in the wind. The night went on. This story is a small one. There is nothing special about it. The old woman is not famous. She does not become enlightened. She does not have a great realization. She simply does, on one ordinary winter night, what the chapter has been teaching her and us, and everyone who has ever encountered these 11 verses. She recognizes the mind has wandered. That is the first verse we return to tonight. She brings the mind back, gently, many times. That is the second. And in the bringing back, she finds the mind has become something other than her enemy. It has become a kind of friend. That is the third. The 3 verses are not 3 separate teachings. They are 3 pieces of one teaching. The recognition, the method, the promise. Each one needs the others. Without recognition, there is nothing to bring back. Without method, the recognition stays only an idea, and without the promise, we would not bother with the long, slow work at all. But together, they are the whole path. A path that does not happen all at once. A path that happens over many winters, in many small houses, in many beds, in many minds. The path of a person learning, slowly, to be kind to their own mind. And, in being kind, to discover that the mind, in return, becomes a kindness. This is not new. This has been the path for 2,500 years. The old woman in our story was walking it without knowing it had a name. We are walking it tonight, you and I, in our own way. Every listener who has ever heard these verses, in any century, in any country, has been walking it. It is older than the listeners. It is older than the Buddha. The wisdom in these verses is the kind that some old, kind people have been finding their way to in every century, with or without these particular words to guide them. The verses just put it more plainly than most. It is the oldest path and the simplest. The path home. Tonight, if you are still awake, you have everything you need. The verses have been heard. The teachings have been gathered. The path has been named. You do not have to remember any of it. The mind will remember on its own. Tomorrow, or the next day, or in the middle of some difficult moment, one of these verses may quietly arise in you. The Fletcher's hand, the wandering mind, the friend more dependable than any other. They are inside you now. They will not leave. This is, in a way, the great gift of any wisdom tradition. What you hear, even if you forget it, does not actually leave. It goes into you. It settles into the soil of your inner life. And later, sometimes much later, when the right moment comes, it rises up again, and you find that you knew exactly what to do. For tonight, the work is done. The chapter has been walked through. The lessons have been laid alongside you. What remains is the simplest thing. To let the breath grow slow, the body be where it is, the mind do what it does, knowing now that whatever it does is all right. The mind that wanders is welcome to wander. The mind that settles is welcome to settle. None of it is wrong. And underneath all of that, the simple fact that you are here, in your bed, in your room, on this particular night, with your own mind, which has carried you through everything, and which is here with you now, more friend than enemy by far. So rest. Let what has been heard tonight find its place. The mind will do the rest of the work, slowly, in the days and weeks and years to come. Stay where you are. Breathe slowly. The chapter is finished. When you are ready, we will come gently to the end. And so we come to the end of our first journey through the mind chapter of the Dhammapada. We have walked through 11 verses, or more accurately, through the 8 of them that had something to teach the heart in the late hours of the night. We have met the Fletcher, the wandering mind, the grandmother who stopped grading herself, the baker who calculated 500 hours, the girl who became her own good company, the old gardener who watched for weeds before they grew, the grandfather and his grandson on a porch, the fish on the bank, and the old woman in the small house on a winter evening who lived everything the chapter had been teaching without knowing she was doing it. The teachings of the Dhammapada will be here tomorrow night, and next week, and in many years, when this small recording is long forgotten. The wisdom in them is older than any recording and outlives all of us. Whatever you have heard tonight, let it settle in you slowly. Some of it may make sense now. Some of it may not make sense until much later. That is all right. Wisdom of this kind is not a thing you understand. It is a thing you live with over many years until one day you realize you have become a little bit kinder to yourself, to the mind you live with, to the world. If you are still with us, thank you for staying. If you have already drifted off, thank you for that too. The chapter was for both kinds of listener. We will be back with another chapter, another set of small verses, another quiet walk through the wisdom of the Dhammapada. Sleep well, and thank you for joining us here at Midnight Monk.